So now we're going to take a look at police organisation and then look at the investigative techniques with relation to Jack the Ripper. So the name for the police force responsible for policing Whitechapel was H Division. The problem they had was the attitudes towards them. It was the division of the Metropolitan Police responsible for covering Whitechapel. They were supposed to be a physical deterrent, and in many areas of the country, they were seen as helpful bobbies on the beat. In Whitechapel, though, they were hated. They were regularly attacked due to the poverty of the area and the fact that crime existed there, so they saw the police as a government arm of control. People didn't like their methods or priorities and saw them as interfering busybodies. This shows the distrust, dislike, and the feeling of persecution that the workers or the people of Whitechapel had towards authority, this feeling of persecution, this victimisation of the poor. You'll also see the Bobby on the Beat is the nickname for them because they were implemented by Robert Peel, or Bobby, responsibilities and their extra duties. The police recruits varied in quality. They patrolled an area, but sergeants checked that bobbies did their duties. Bobbies were supposed to act as a visible deterrent by patrolling the area. However, due to the population and overcrowding in Whitechapel, crime still occurred. Effectively, they were understaffed compared to how many residents of Whitechapel there were. They carried handcuffs, lanterns and truncheons, but no firearms. They had to deal with issues such as prostitution and associated violence, alcohol and associated violence, protection rackets, as in like gangsters, and people saying, you have to give us money and we will make sure your shop doesn't get smashed up. However, if the shop owner didn't pay the money to these people, they'd be the ones who smashed up the shops. Police had many responsibilities and were effectively treated as social workers. This brings them into immediate conflict with Whitechapel residents who still see them as a controlling factor of the government. Police also help the community through soup kitchens, looking after stray children, orphans, and stopping runaway horses. So how did the police deal with the Jack the Ripper murders? The Jack the Ripper murders lasted from the 31st of August until the 9th of November of 1888. The victims were Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, and Catherine Eddowes, who was found on the same day as Elizabeth Stride, and Mary Jane Kelly. Techniques that police used to try and find the perpetrator or to try and find the Ripper were following leads from the public, asking people what they had seen and following up on it, evidence from post-mortems, as in like looking at the bodies, victims' possessions, what was found on the victim, visiting asylums, because it was thought that because of the nature of the crime and the depravity involved, no sane person could have committed the crime. They also looked at indirect leads from newspaper articles, as in like literally reading the newspaper and finding out what journalists were saying and what rumours were spreading about the crimes and following up on it. They also had coroner's reports. However, some of these, the problem with this was they were contradictory. Handing out 80,000 leaflets with informations of the crime. Interviewing key witnesses. The problem they faced here is that people were reluctant to talk to the police. They were effectively met with a wall of silence. What the police did in order to get around this was they set up soup kitchens, as in literally organising food to be provided for the poor so that people would come to them. The police would serve them food, but at the same time ask them questions and try and also listening in on conversations to see what people were talking about, if anybody had information about the Ripper. As time went on in the investigation and due to the mounting pressure, the police became increasingly desperate. For example, they even used bloodhounds to try and catch the criminal, but they forgot to pay the owner of the dogs. They also placed rubber boots on their rubber on the sole of their boots, so they could try to sneak around and catch the Ripper red-handed. As due to the primitive techniques available to them, they believed the only way they could catch the Ripper was probably by catching him red-handed. Some police even dressed as prostitutes to try and lure Jack the Ripper out into attacking them, but the police didn't shave their moustaches. Frederick Aberline was a diligent and determined officer who walked the streets at night to search for the Ripper. He even paid for prostitutes to have a room for the night, trying to protect them. So what you'll see is, on the one hand, there is some officers diligently trying to catch the Ripper, but you've also got intense pressure and media scrutiny depicting them as being incompetent. The limitations of these techniques were that Manuals on how to collect the evidence were produced, but this shows the inexperience of the police. There were simply too many people in Whitechapel to investigate, as we've discussed. The police were understaffed compared to the vast Whitechapel population. They can't investigate everyone. Even keeping track of the record was a huge job without computers. Hundreds of hoax claims made the job harder. Police simply couldn't follow up on all leads and possibilities and potential witnesses or people with information. The police simply didn't have time to follow up on every single lead they got. Articles published in newspapers were not always accurate. Post-mortem and coroner's reports often had different opinions. For example, early on in the investigation, they said the murderer must be someone with significant anatomical skill. It must be a surgeon or somebody like that due to their expert understanding of the human body. Later on, it could just be a butcher or a vet, and then by the end it could just be anybody. So you get contradictory coroner's reports and post-mortem reports. Newspapers were often critical of police techniques, which added pressure to the police, and also the newspapers tended to sensationalize what had actually happened. This wasted time and lies following inaccurate leads. Technological limitations, simply they don't have DNA evidence or anything like that, or if they did have any, they can't do anything with it. So technological limitations meant that investigation techniques were limited. No behavioural science limitations. They can't study the habits of serial killers and things like that. The information just isn't available to them at the time because the technology and the psychological understanding hasn't caught up. You also get things like the Dear Boss letters, which is just one amongst hundreds of people falsely claiming to be Jack the Ripper. It's just impossible for police to keep up with the level of simply paperwork and man hours required to do the job and catch the Ripper. Made harder by the pressures of the media and people falsely claiming to be the Ripper. All of this makes police seem incompetent. The pressures they faced included media scrutiny. The press not only published stories based on guesswork, they also criticised everything the police did. That doesn't help them. Papers were sensationalist because simply it sold more copies. They also featured anti-Jewish articles and caricatures which added to the unrest and published stories about police incompetence. So you've got that ongoing tension already in Whitechapel that we've spoken about on a previous video. And now into the mix of that, you get a serial killer where everybody's blaming everybody and nobody trusts anybody. You've also got community unrest, as I've just mentioned. It's a very racist time. Racial tension meant that evidence was often cleared away quickly. For example, the graffiti that we saw saying the Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. The purpose being prevent race riots, which would cause more work for the police and make it harder to catch the criminal. Every community blames each other for the murders. The public disorder aspect of the case was always in police minds, as in we need to make sure we keep a lid on Whitechapel because it's a powder keg, because of all the different types of people in the area and the desperation and the poverty. Other problems that police face was simply, as I've mentioned, no forensics. They don't have the technology that would have made catching the Ripper easier. We also get a group called the Vigilance Committee, as in like vigilantes, a mob made up of local business owners angry that they were losing money because nobody was out shopping because they were scared of the Ripper. The Vigilance Committee became angry at police, so they decided to catch the Ripper themselves. This hindered the investigation because they were out carrying torches and patrolling loudly at night. Contradicting that, you've got the police believing that the best opportunity was to catch the Ripper red-handed. I spoke earlier about them having rubber on the soles of their shoes to move around quietly. So they're trying to lure the Ripper out, whilst the Vigilance Committee is scaring him away. So it was counterproductive to catching the Ripper. There's also a belief that rumours spread that it was the SFD socialists trying to make the government and the police look bad. You've also got 300 hoax letters claiming to be the Ripper, making it hard for police to follow up on this. You've got police force rivalry. Other branches of the Metropolitan Police was brought in to try to catch the Ripper, and therefore each one wanted to be the one to catch him, which led to possibly the graffiti saying the Jews are the men who won't be blamed for nothing. The one reason that was cleared away was potentially because of the disorder it could cause, but also perhaps because one police force wanted to keep that information away from another police force. Later improvements that they learned from the Jack the Ripper investigation that developed were the Bertillon system in 1894, which meant gathering measurements and mugshots of criminals so that, for example, witnesses, if they said, I saw a man who looked like this, the police could then get out mugshots of criminals and show them previous criminals who committed similar crimes, and the witness could identify them from the pictures. Other improvements, not to do with policing, but you get the Peabody estate, which improved conditions for the workers and therefore created less crime. And finally, later on, you get improved forensics, which will be covered on the 20th century slide.